Now, U.S. President Donald Trump reiterated that he wasn't surprised that Putin skipped a U.S.-orchestrated meeting in Turkey between Ukrainian and Russian officials.
You know, they all said Putin was going and Zelensky was going, and I said, if I don't go, I guarantee Putin's not going. And he didn't go, and I understand that, but we're going to get it. We're going to get it done. We got to get it done. 5,000 young people are being killed every single week on average, and we're going to get it done.
Were you surprised when Zelensky didn't show up either, sir? Were you surprised when Zelensky didn't show up either?
No, he didn't show up because he heard Putin wasn't going, so.
When do you think you'll meet the president?
As soon as we can set it up.
We're now joined by Ben Hodges, retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General and former commander of U.S. Army in Europe. He's in Frankfurt. So we've seen a lot of jockeying for position ahead of today's talks. What exactly are you watching as they get underway?
Well, Aaron, thank you. I'm watching with disgust how the American president completely failed to provide the necessary leadership here. But I think this is because he's never actually cared about Ukraine. He's only cared about getting some sort of a deal, which is why he has taken the Russian side on this from the day he became our president. So this back and forth over the last 2 days, well, you know, I'm not going if Putin won't go unless I go. And there's so much false information being thrown around by the American side. I never, ever expected that Putin would show up. That guy is absolutely does not want to sit across the table from Vladimir Zelensky because it would require him to acknowledge that President Zelensky is the head of a sovereign state. And from the beginning of this conflict, the Russians, they've never changed their objective to destroy Ukraine as a sovereign state. And so I just have to say that while I hope that one day we'll get to some sort of a resolution that is sustainable, nobody that pays close attention to this believes that Russia will live up to any agreement unless they're forced to. And this is why the Ukrainians are so dead set about having a ceasefire first, so that the Russians can demonstrate that they will live up to an agreement.
Well, as you were saying there's a lack of U.S. leadership right now and also a lack of engagement from the Russian side. Is there any consolation or any hope for any progress from these talks today in Istanbul?
Well, I think the U.S. approach was doomed from the beginning because it was based on a faulty appreciation of how the war even started, when it started, who the aggressor was. And so from the beginning, the U.S. side was blaming Ukraine. And I mean, before they even started having talks, they were saying that Ukraine is going to have to give up land. Why? I mean, why is that the start point that Ukraine has to give up land? Russia is the aggressor. The whole world knows this. And of course, this war started back in 2014, 11 years ago, not just 3 years ago. So the U.S. approach has been based on a faulty appreciation of what this war is all about. And when the president said, that terrible day when President Zelensky was in the Oval Office and President Trump's yelling at him and said, "You got no cards," that demonstrated that he didn't understand why Ukrainians are fighting, what they're fighting for. Now, I think we have to reframe how we look at what's going on. To get to a sustainable resolution of this conflict, meaning one that everybody can live with and that will not require permanent presence of troops to enforce it. In order to get to that negotiation part, you're going to have a ceasefire. And it probably will require some kind of force to compel the Russians to live up to whatever ceasefire agreement there is. Otherwise, they'll violate it in the first hour, as they traditionally do. And so what's happening now, all of these conversations, these are not the negotiations. These are discussions that are necessary to finally get to a ceasefire. So if I do it in sequence, phase one, preparation phase, that's where we are now. Conversations in London, Istanbul, Paris, Brussels, Kyiv, the Oval Office, everywhere. That's phase one. will finally get to some kind of a ceasefire agreement. Because look, the Russians are in trouble. I mean, they have not made any meaningful progress in the last year, but have lost 400,000 troops. And they can see that they cannot knock Ukraine out of the war. So their only hope is that we quit on Ukraine. So that's why they're wanting to drag this out. But you get a ceasefire, then you can have negotiations about all the big issues.
Now, you mentioned some type of troops which could actually prevent Russia from violating a potential ceasefire. Are we talking about troops provided by Ukraine, or are we talking about international peacekeepers who could have some type of tripwire function for preventing further escalation of the conflict?
The model that I have in my head was the NATO implementation force, the I-4, that went into Bosnia in 1995. This was a large, well-trained, well-organized, well-equipped combat force that was under a single commander, the Supreme Allied Commander of Europe, and it was also had a very clear mission of stopping the fighting, and they had enough people to be in between the Serbs, the Croatians, and the Bosniaks, and the key was that they had rules of engagement that allowed them the authority to immediately inflict consequences on anybody that violated the agreement. As a result, there were almost zero violations in that first 2 years of the implementation of the Dayton Peace Accord. Now, this is not a perfect model for where we are now, but if we're talking about implementing a ceasefire, we're not talking about sending a peacekeeping force, blue berets and flip-flops and SUVs. It needs to be a combat force that has the authority to immediately strike any side, either side, Russian or Ukrainian, that violates the ceasefire. You do that 3 or 4 times, people will stop. But you can be sure if there's not a force that's capable of doing that, then the Russians will violate it first hour, every hour.
That was retired U.S. Army Lieutenant General Ben Hodges. Thank you very much for your analysis.
Thanks, Aaron.